Hello and welcome. This month it's Global Employee Health and Fitness Month, and we thought why not interview some of the experts in our network to understand how shared mobility helps employee fitness and wellness. Turns out, shared mobility not only increases employees' health levels and fitness levels, it also benefits the employer from the returns from financially. And that way, the employer also has not only the employee wellness, but also a financial element to it. Join us in this webinar and let's find out what the experts have to say across the world.
Because I'm in the mobility business, I immediately think of e-bikes, because I do think more people should go to work by bike because they anyway have to commute. And many of them, they spend their time in stuck in traffic or in a public transport where they are squeezed if they are able to sit at all. And I think it's not necessarily healthy for the physical, but also not for the mental health. And I believe going by bike is just the best option if you can, of course, if you can physically, but also from the distance.
If I had to choose one word, I would probably say walking. And just because I think when we think of health and fitness, we think of the gym, we think of all these activities. But in North America, we see people driving to the gym so they can exercise. And I was actually reading a study, I think last week, from the UK that was saying that just 11 minutes a day of decent activity, think fast walking, can actually reduce the risk of early death. It might not get you healthy. I'm not saying 11 minutes will get you healthy, but it already does a lot. So for me, if you can just have a workplace that encourage, can be walking to work, but walking for lunch, walking with a colleague outside if it's nice to do a meeting, just a walking culture, that's a start towards more health and fitness, I would say.
Would say would be productivity. If you're healthy, you're fit, I am pretty sure that your productivity really goes up when you are, in your office working in your team with your team members. So I would say it should be productivity.
The word that comes to mind is e-bike, but that's the only word that ever comes to mind, whenever I enter a conversation or anything these days, much to everyone's chagrin. I don't know that there's a single word so much as like make your commute fun, or love your commute, and I think that from an employer point of view, if people love their commute, then going to work is what's at the other end of it is not so bad. A lot of people hate their commute, right? And so you're in a terrible mood when you get there. You're in a terrible mood before you have to get home, etc. E-bikes are for those people that it works for, which is a growing number. They're a great way to get somewhere relatively quickly, consistently, with as much exercise as you want to get, and no more. And all they tick a lot of boxes for those of us who've had the Kool-Aid,
So, I mean, I don't have data on exactly what is exactly the mobility effect on employee happiness, but what I like a study that has been done in Europe, and I think it's really impressive, is that they measured that if you have more than 40 minutes of commuting time, every minute additionally is like a decrease of salary by 1% from the kind of satisfaction level of the employee. I don't remember exactly, I don't remember who made the study, but it does make sense. Like if you have to commute very far, or if the commute is very uncomfortable, it has like you get less happy as an employee, even if salary is high. Like you can almost compare it to a salary aspect. Also there, I mean, we don't have like I studied economics at one point, so I feel so comfortable to talk about data if I don't actually have them. So I don't have data on employee happiness. What we have data on is on the if our solution, what impact it has on their mobility behavior. And there we saw that over 70% of users that it had a positive impact on their mobility behavior. The moment that they had an offering, I think it was the case with a company in the Swiss mountains, they have e-bikes and like Teslas as well. And now they will also start with the public transport integration. And I thought it was quite interesting that so many people felt like this multimodal approach, shared approach, had a positive impact on their behavior. At the same time, I think 20, like from all from all the employees that used to come to work with the car, 28% came less or no more with the car, which I thought was also quite nice. And I hope it had a positive impact on their well-being. I just don't really have data on well-being.
I think that's an interesting question. There's a few studies that are coming out there and there, but nothing very comprehensive. I'd say overall, I think what we've seen is commuting impacts health and wellness a lot, but mostly stress. Like there's a lot of stress and like happiness that's either created or diminished by a bad commute or a good commute. There's actually studies that show that commute times over 45 minutes, employees are more at risk of leaving a job. And that just adding 10 minutes afterwards to commute is the equivalent of 19% pay cut in job satisfaction. So that's a big impact on satisfaction. What we've seen is that short commutes are always good. If you can have an active commute, not everyone can, but if you can have an active commute, well, that's good for your well-being, for reduced stress, good for your cardiovascular health and many other things. If you have a very long commute but can have an hybrid schedule, maybe go a few days to the office and save the commute time other days. That's great.
What we have been observing, of course, this is yet picking up in our country, in India. It is not very prominent yet, but few large companies, what they are trying to do is they are trying to reward the people who are commuting on a bicycle or an e-cycle to work. There are these programs like Cycle to Work where you encourage to do that. Apart from it, what I feel is when I just spoke about productivity, I think we at times we lack going to the gym, exercising. We don't find time, especially in the morning because we're always stuck in the traffic. Now I want to drive a car to reach my office. I don't find time. I'm stuck in the traffic. Enough of time to get stuck in that car in the traffic, but no time for yourself to be healthy and fit. So what I feel is that, in case if your distance is short, say about 4 to 5 miles, I would say it's very easy for you to use a cycle to commute to work, to your college, if you are a student. What I'm observing off late is, like I mentioned, a few companies have been innovating. Rewards is one thing, but to encourage this, they are also offering shower and changing room facility. So people in India, because of the climate, you may get sweated because of the humid weather. So, but still to encourage people, there is shower facility available. You can always change after reaching office, and that's how a few companies have started doing it.
Well, they measure it with Commutify. That's the simple answer. But no, it's but that's what we do at the core of Commutify is we help gather the right data to make sure programs are meeting the needs of employees, but are also being cost effective or impacting the environment, and that we're building and improving the right programs. But really getting into what do we look at, I'd say there's many angles to commuting. There's, of course, I talked about the commute time. We all want to minimize that. When we do surveys, we see almost 75% of employees are saying that's one of their key factors in deciding a commute. But then there's other things. There's the commute cost. I think we should look when we think of a return on investment on the cost of that commute, both on the employer, who's, by example, might be spending tens of thousands of dollars on parking spaces. These leases are expensive or might be spending on other amenities, but also the cost on the employee side. If you think of someone driving to work maybe 30 kilometers, there's a cost of depreciation, gas, insurance, parking. There's a lot of costs that we don't realize. I think the average commuter spends $5,000 to $10,000 a year driving into work for long distance drivers. But there's also the sustainability impact. We're seeing more and more organizations try to measure their scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, but also scope 3 emissions, which, as you may know, are indirect emissions. And commuting is a big part of that. We're working with organizations and seeing that this is a significant proportion of commuting emissions for a company, even higher than the energy required to run a building. So your entire building energy is smaller than just the cars getting into your office. So that's a clear return on investment that is important for most companies today, and that can be measured and reduced in terms of commuting program. So I'd say for my advice for a company is try to get a baseline, understand where you stand today, and then as you implement program, you can compare against that baseline. Have you improved sustainability? Have you reduced cost? Have you improved commute time? And overall, I think these factors will lead to hopefully increased well-being and increased happiness.
There are different approaches. Again, it plays a bit around what kind of modalities that they book with us. If it's just bikes and they've never had bikes before, it's probably more about like they would measure how do the employees like the offering? Is it being used? How many trips per day per vehicle and all of that? But then if it comes to cars, what is really interesting that most companies already had a fleet. And what we do, even before we start working with them, we analyze the existing fleet with trackers. Like we put for a couple of months trackers into each car, and we measure the behavior. We look at what point in, like how many times in the couple of months were there actually all cars gone at the same time. And so based on that data, we were now with several clients able to reduce the fleet by 30% by making them shareable. And so that's something they can measure very, very quickly. Like they just reduced the fleet cost by a third and the parking costs as well. And then another nice example where like the company already had, I think 30 cars and we reduced it to 15 and we kind of promised them the same availability of mobility to their employees. And what they had, like what they also measure is the, I have to think about the English word. In German, it's Auslastung. What it means is like the amount of, the percentage of time the car is actually being used. It's probably the nicest translation. So
utilization.
Utilization, exactly. The utilization rate, and it used to be very low, like Swiss standards, like 5% of the time it's riding, the rest of the time it was parked. Plus, also when it was riding, it was on average, I think 1.1 person in the car. What we achieve now with the 15 cars by opening it up to the whole company, before it was just selected people who were able to access the cars. We opened it up to all 8,000 employees. They can also book it during like for private drives. They have to pay, of course, for that. And we brought the utilization rate up to 66%, which is like it's so much higher. And by doing it and by opening it up for the weekend, for the nights, they had income from the user fees and they could reduce their cost for the fleet, not just by half because of having the size of the fleet, but actually by 75%, because then they also get the user fees in. And for the user, the fees is still much lower than the public shares because the company subsidizes them. So it's really a win-win, and it's very easily measurable actually for the clients.
Yeah, for us, I'd say there's two key changes I've seen. The first one is that before the pandemic, we were seeing some employers, I'd say the best employers, investing into employee commuting, but most of them, when transportation teams or HR teams or facility teams tried to pitch their leadership, they were hearing resistance. Commuting is not part of our responsibility. The employee needs to get to our door, and that's where we start providing a good office. Post-pandemic, now that we've seen that everyone can work at home, or at least in an office context, we're seeing the employers and the real estate firm change their mindset. They now understand that they need to provide an experience if they want people to come back to the office. But that experience is not useful if no one makes a commute. So commute is now looked at leadership from top companies, top real estate firms as a must-have today for companies. So that's the first thing. The second thing is on the organization of things. While before pandemic, it was very easy, 9 to 5, 5 days a week. Do you need do I want to subsidize your transit? I'll buy you a monthly transit pass. Do you need to drive and park? I'll get you a monthly parking. From an administrative point of view, that's very, very simple. Now, post pandemic, you might be coming 2, 3 times a week. Your days might be shifting. So there's a lot more logistic in terms of maybe today you need a daily parking. Maybe tomorrow you will bike to the office, or maybe you need more dynamic subsidies like to pay for your transit today. So the entire logistic being more complex, we see that spreadsheets don't cut it anymore. And that's really where we've been working with employers in terms of having dynamic booking systems that employees can access the resources they need. We have dynamic subsidy systems from even Visa cards to help pay for your bike ride, help pay for your transit ticket, so that we can think of commuting more as a daily pattern that needs to be optimized with technology instead of a static pattern that never changed over 1 year.
Employee happiness is certainly something. It's something that has been like brought up to employers, that employees really like and appreciate that. But also reduced amount of car parking needed. We had one client, they started with us a long time ago in 2018, and they used to have a lot of free parking for employees. Then they moved into a new building where they had, like, I think not even a third of parking, and they had to find alternatives. And instead of saying like, yeah, guys, you just come with public transport, they offered them alternatives. Like there was kind of like a fee per parking, like you could still book a parking spot, but it was quite expensive. But then there were also 40 bikes for them. Yeah, so I think it also, like the bikes, they also help when it comes to cost, employee happiness, and also employee commuting time, because in the city usually you're much faster from one spot to the other with an e-bike than with a car, because you're not stuck in traffic, but also you don't have to look for a parking spot. With public transport, you have to wait until the next train comes. It is delayed, and you don't have all those hassles with the bike.
I think it started, we have a couple of companies that have include Zig in their employee, transportation benefits, subsidies sort of. So I think that's innovative, on the employer side, thinking about where people are going to park their $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $8,000 cargo bike, whatever it is, right? Thinking about that is important. So the good news with an e-bike, for the most part, people don't have to worry about charging. You're not building, and actually we heard spoke with last week. There was an EV conference in Toronto, quite a good one, called EV and Charging Network or something like that. And there was representatives from a large telecommunications company who own a lot of real estate, who were trying to figure out how to get people back to work to this empty real estate. And they were so focused on like, how do we install chargers so people can drive their electric cars and blah, 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 that they weren't even thinking about e-bikes, right? And so the nice thing about e-bikes is you don't need to install the charging networks. Like, yes, it would be nice if you upgraded some secure parking and stuff, but it's way less expensive than stringing out 220 volts or whatever it is to every parking spot.
In fact, we are not only seeing this with corporates, we are also seeing this with the government employees, whether, there's a smart city mission in India, which is conducting this cycle to work campaign. where the government employees are also encouraged to use a bicycle. And every time they are either using Ultimo or Strava app when they are riding. So there's a leaderboard that whoever cycles the most gets some reward and recognition. Like I said, we also are seeing this with corporates. So where, it's not always monetary, financial benefit that you derive out of it, but that sense that you're contributing to the environment and you are staying fit is something that a personal user should gauge out of it. So yes, absolutely, it's happening, albeit at a very small scale, but I'm pretty sure that this will also pick up in the near future.